The journey to Umokoro was long and dusty, but Chidi didn't mind. He had always loved traveling, especially to places he had never been before. As the old rickety bus swerved through narrow village roads, he watched the changing scenery, the thick palm trees, red earth roads, and the scattered mud houses with thatched roofs. The air smelled different, fresher than the city air he was used to in Enugu. He had come to Umokoro to visit his grandmother, Mama Yugo, who had been asking to see him for months. She's an old woman, bent with age, but her voice was still strong each time she spoke on the phone. "Chidi, my son, you must come. It is important." There was something in her voice that made him uneasy, but he had promised to visit, and he always kept his word. As he stepped down from the bus, the villagers eyed him curiously. They could always tell when someone was from the city. His jeans and sneakers gave him away immediately. An old man selling roasted maize near the roadside looked at him and shook his head slowly, muttering something under his breath. Chidi ignored him and walked towards the small footpath that led to his grandmother's house. Mama Yugo's compound was just as he remembered from the last time he visited as a child, wide, with an old mango tree standing proudly at the center. The walls of the house were painted in a fading blue color, and a few chickens clucked around the backyard. The door creaked as he pushed it open. "Chidi, Nwam." Mama Yugo's voice rang with joy as she rushed forward to embrace him. She held him tightly, her frail arms surprisingly strong. "Oh, Mama, you're still as strong as ever," Chidi said, smiling as he sat down on the wooden bench inside the small sitting room. Mama Yugo chuckled. "Old age cannot hold me down." "But, my son, why did you come now, of all times?" Chidi frowned. "You asked me to come, Mama. Is something wrong?" Mama Yugo sighed, glancing at the open window as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. Then she stood up and bolted the door. Chidi watched her with growing curiosity. "It is February 13th, she said in a low voice. "Tomorrow is February 14th. Chidi was confused. "Yes, Mama. Valentine's Day. What about it?" Mama Yugo looked at him, her eyes dark with something he couldn't quite place. "Fear. Sadness. Here in Umokoro, February 14th is not for love. It is for mourning." Chidi felt a chill run down his spine. "Mourning? For what?" She took a deep breath before answering. "For the ghost of February 14th. The night was heavy with silence. Even the crickets, which usually fill the village with their evening songs, seemed to have gone quiet. Chidi lay on the small mat in his grandmother's hut, but sleep refused to come. His mind kept replaying Mama Yugo's words. A ghost. He had heard of superstitions before, but this was different. There was something in her voice, an undeniable truth that sent cold shivers down his spine. Unable to shake off his curiosity, Chidi sat up and lit the small kerosene lamp beside him. He needed answers. Quietly, he tiptoed to the sitting room where Mama Yugo sat, staring into the dim glow of a candle. "Mama," he whispered. "Tell me about the ghost." She sighed heavily, her wrinkled hands clasping together. "It started many years ago," she began. "A young woman named Adiz was betrayed by the man she loved. He made her a promise, a vow to marry her on February 14th, but he never showed up. Instead, he left her waiting, humiliated before the entire village." Chidi leaned in, listening closely. She was found the next morning by the river, her white dress soaked in blood. No one knows if she ended her own life or if someone took it from her. But from that day, strange things began happening in Umokoro every Valentine's Day. Lovers would disappear. Shadows would move without bodies. And those who ignored the warnings, Mama Yugo hesitated. They never lived to see another Valentine's Day. Chidi swallowed hard. "So the ghost is Adiz?" Mama Yugo nodded slowly. Her spirit still roams, searching for something or someone. A gust of wind blew through the window, making the candle flicker. Chidi shivered. He had come to Umokoro expecting a peaceful visit, but now he realized he had walked straight into a mystery that had haunted the village for decades. And tomorrow was February 14th. Chidi could feel the weight of the villagers' stares as he moved through the narrow paths of Umokoro. The unease in their eyes, the way they whispered when they thought he wasn't looking, it all unsettled him. Yet, he couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to the story of Adiz than what Mama Yugo had told him. Determined to uncover the truth, he sought out the oldest villagers, asking careful questions about the past. Most refused to speak, their faces tightening with fear. But an elderly man, Pa Nduka, finally relented after Chidi pressed him long enough. "Boy," the old man croaked, his voice shaking, "some things are better left buried. You dig too deep, and you might not like what you find." Chidi swallowed. "I just want to understand." Pa Nduka sighed and leaned in closer. It wasn't just a betrayal. Adiz was deceived by someone powerful. Someone who made sure her cries would never be heard. Chidi frowned. Who was he? But before Pa Nduka could answer, the old man's eyes darted around fearfully, as if expecting someone to be listening. He suddenly stood up, shaking his head. "You should leave this alone, my son. Some ghosts don't want to be disturbed." That night, as Chidi lay on his mat, a strange whispering sound filled his room. A soft, eerie humming, like a sorrowful lullaby. His heart pounded as he turned towards the window, but all he saw was darkness. Then, just as he closed his eyes, he heard it, his name, whispered in the wind. The next morning, Chidi could no longer ignore the signs. He had to dig deeper. He sought out Neka, an old woman known for remembering everything about the village's history. She sat on her wooden stool, grinding pepper in a small mortar, her wrinkled hands moving in slow, steady motions. Adiz's death, Chidi began carefully. Was it really just a broken heart? Neka stopped grinding. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she answered. "No." Chidi leaned in. "Then what happened?" She sighed, looking up at the sky as if recalling a painful memory. She loved a man who was never meant to be hers. A man who promised her forever, only to destroy her instead. The night before their supposed wedding, she disappeared. By morning, she was found by the river, her white dress soaked in blood. Chidi's stomach twisted. Who was the man? Neka hesitated. A man whose name is still feared in this village. A man whose descendants still live here, guarding his dark secret. Chidi shivered as the old woman's voice dropped lower. If you truly wish to know the truth, go to the river at midnight. But be warned, she does not rest. The first sign of trouble came just as the sun set. Chidi's belongings were thrown across his room. His shoes, neatly placed earlier, now lay in a messy heap. His books, once stacked on the table, were scattered. The air smelled damp, like rain-soaked earth, even though the sky remained clear. Then, the voices started. At first, it was just Mama's, whispers that faded before he could understand them. But as the night deepened, they grew louder. A woman's voice, calling his name. Soft, sorrowful, insistent. He turned in bed, heart pounding. Who's there? Silence. Then, a shadow flickered by his window. Chidi bolted upright. He ran to the window and peeped outside, but there was nothing. Only the mango tree swaying in the breeze. He exhaled shakily, but just as he turned away, he caught it, just for a second. A pale figure standing by the tree. Adiz. The next day, shaken but more determined than ever, Chidi confronted Mama Yugo. Who was the man Adiz loved? He demanded. His grandmother's face darkened. You must stop this, Chidi. You don't understand what you're meddling with. I need to know the truth, he insisted. If I don't, her spirit will never rest. Mama Yugo exhaled, her gaze distant. It was the late Igwe's son. The man who was to be king. He made her believe he loved her, but he was already betrothed to another. When she refused to let go, they silenced her. Chidi clenched his fist. So he had her killed. Mama Yugo shook her head. The truth was buried long ago. But now, the past has come back to haunt us all. On the night of February 14th, Chidi and a few brave villagers made their way to the cursed river. The air was thick with tension as they set up the ritual. Mama Yugo chanted old incantations, pouring libations into the water. The wind howled, the trees shook, and then the river bubbled. A shadow rose from the depths. Chidi stood frozen as Adi's ghost took form. Her eyes, filled with sorrow and anger, bore into his. You seek the truth, she whispered. Chidi nodded. Then see, she said, and suddenly, he was no longer at the river but in the past, watching as Adi's fate unfolded before his eyes. Chidi returned to the present with tears in his eyes. He had seen it all. The betrayal. The lies. The murder. He turned to the villagers. We cannot let this secret remain buried. The truth was finally spoken, and as it spread through Umokoro, Adi's spirit began to fade, her soul finally free. For the first time in decades, February 14th passed without tragedy. Chidi left Umokoro a changed man, carrying Adi's story with him. The legend of the ghost of February 14th would never be forgotten, but now, it was a tale of justice rather than sorrow.